The gavel cracked once, sharp as a gunshot, and the room froze. Judge Veronica Hale said, "Verdict stands," her voice iron-wrapped. Maya Cole said, "I have nothing to add," though her eyes searched the floor like it could swallow her whole. Ethan Price said, "Breathe with me," his steady presence an invisible rope against drowning. Chris Alvarez said, "We'll file the notice within the hour," his jaw locked tight. Outside, the press murmured like wolves scratching at the walls. Veronica Hale's gaze cut like glass, each word tightening the air. Maya Cole thought of the unopened letter in her bag, heavy as stone. Ethan Price said, "You are not alone," offering a calm that sounded like home. Chris Alvarez slid her his card, whispering, "No words for them." In the gallery, Noah Kim sketched fast, his pencil whispering secrets. Maya Cole mouthed, "Ava," but the name died unheard. The corridor air was sharp with winter, as Ethan Price said, one step at a time, guiding without touch. Maya Cole scanned every doorway, memorizing exits like old scars. Chris Alvarez said, "Elevator left. Service stair if blocked," his voice mapping escape. Judge Hale passed, her nod slicing warmth from the hallway. A flash caught Maya's face, bleaching her into anonymity. She whispered, "No statements," the words already swallowed. Ethan Price said, "You are not alone," his calm a fragile anchor. Chris Alvarez said, "We appeal in 30 days," already moving with mechanical urgency. Outside, chants echoed faint through glass that trembled. Maya said, "I need a minute," but her steps betrayed her. Ethan Price said, "Take it walking," as the elevator doors closed them in mirrored silence. In the holding room, concrete walls breathed chill into bones. Maya Cole stared at a paper cup she would never drink. Ethan Price said, "Sip, if you can," sliding it closer, a small beacon. Chris Alvarez said, "The record shows silence, which is your right," though the word twisted bitter. Maya Cole said, "Silence is safer," tracing the seam in the table. The sealed envelope in her bag weighed like iron. Ethan Price said, "You should not carry it all alone," warmth slipping into cold air. Chris Alvarez said, "We need one clear thread," his eyes pressing for a secret he could not name. Maya Cole said, "Not yet," her gaze scanning exits she already owned. A vent rattled, sounding like rain. Ethan Price said, "We'll map tomorrow," as steam drifted from untouched coffee. Across the street, Judge Veronica Hale brushed off microphone saying, "No further comment," sliding into a black sedan. In an alcove, Noah Kim said, "You don't know me," into a burner phone, his voice trembling. He sketched Maya Cole's reflection in the courthouse glass. Ethan Price said, "We exit on 3, their shadows merging into silhouettes." Chris Alvarez said, "Keep your head down," urgency stiff in his tone. Noah Kim whispered, "I saw the fire before the sirens," words rattling like coins. The dispatcher asked for his name. He hung up. Hale's sedan cut across a puddle, swallowing courthouse lights. Maya Cole raised her chin, the air carrying a scent of smoke from memory. The transfer van growled like a caged animal. Maya Cole whispered, "Count the turns," as lights flashed by. Ethan Price said, "I'll meet you at intake," his hand pressed against glass before the door shut. Chris Alvarez said, "I'll file tonight," his words weary but firm. A guard barked. No talking, the command final. Maya thought of Ava tapping a pen twice, ritual before every hard choice. She tapped the rhythm silently on her knees. In the shadows, Noah Kim said, "She is not the one," scribbling into his sketchbook. Judge Hale paused over her phone, eyes fixed like she heard ghosts. The van rolled forward, courthouse shrinking behind sleet. Maya Cole said, "I will not break," and the echo clung only to her. The prison gates clanged behind Maya Cole, and the air thickened with the smell of metal and bleach. A guard barked orders, but she barely listened. Ethan Price said, "I'll visit tomorrow," his eyes holding the words steady. Chris Alvarez muttered, "Paperwork first," his briefcase clutched like a shield. Inside, the inmates' voices rose like a tide, laughter too sharp, whispers too low. Maya Cole whispered, "Count the exits," though none existed. She remembered Ava's pen tapping and pressed the rhythm into her palm. A female guard said no photos, but flashes still burst beyond the gates. Ethan Price said, "Keep your ground," and his tone almost broke. Maya's heart raced like it was sprinting inside her chest, but her steps stayed slow. The doors closed behind her with finality, a sound that felt like chains tightening. In the intake room, fluorescent light buzzed overhead as Maya Cole sat on a cold bench. A clerk said, "Name and number," without looking up. Ethan Price's voice echoed in her mind, "You are not alone," but the room felt hollow. Chris Alvarez said earlier, "This is procedure," and she clung to the words like driftwood. A camera clicked, capturing her profile for the record. Maya Cole whispered, "Erase me," but the machine blinked red in defiance. Another inmate shouted down the hall, the sound sharp as broken glass. A female guard said, hands flat, pressing her palms against steel. She thought of Ava's laugh, light as paper, and it steadied her pulse. The door opened, and silence followed her in like a shadow. Across town, Ethan Price sat in his office surrounded by stacks of files. He whispered, "We fight piece by piece," his hand tracing notes like prayers. Chris Alvarez said over the phone, "Deadlines will kill us if silence does not," his voice tight. Ethan flipped open the sealed letter copy, its edges worn, though the original stayed with Maya. He said, "What did you keep from me, Ava?" And the name cracked the room. Outside, rain streaked glass, each drop an unwelcome reminder. Ethan Price leaned back, exhaustion pulling at his shoulders. On the wall, a photo of Ava Cole smiled bright and young, pen in hand, eyes frozen in memory. He said, "We cannot lose her twice," and the clock ticked louder, the hands merciless. Judge Veronica Hale poured herself tea in her private chambers, the porcelain clinking faintly. She said to the empty room, "Justice demands silence," though her tone cracked. Files stacked high on her desk threatened to collapse under weight. A shadow of her reflection lingered in the glass pane, doubling her face. She whispered, Ava knew too much before catching herself. On her bookshelf, rows of law volumes stood like soldiers, dust gathering at their spines. A photo frame turned face down sat ignored. Veronica Hale's hands trembled before she steadied them, with practiced grace. She exhaled slowly, each breath measured like her rulings. The chamber clock struck softly, but the sound seemed to echo like judgment itself. Noah Kim sat alone in a dim diner, sketchbook open, pencil darting across paper. He said softly, "She is not the one," while sketching Maya's profile from memory. A waitress said, "Refill?" and he shook his head, hand trembling. The smell of grease and coffee thickened the air. He muttered, "Ava tapped twice before the fire," and his pencil pressed too hard, breaking the lead. His eyes darted to the neon sign outside, flickering red like warning sirens. Noah whispered, "They never listen," flipping the page fast. He sketched Ava's face, bright and smiling, but the lines came jagged. A couple nearby laughed, their voices muffled, distant. He closed the book quickly, as if hiding a crime. The visitation phones crackled as Maya Cole said, "Tell me why they want me quiet," and watched reflections twitch on the glass. A thin inmate said, "You're allowed without speaking," and slid her a name on a torn napkin. The guard said, "Hands visible," and the warning scratched like gravel. Maya Cole said, "Ava wrote before the fire," and pressed her palm to the cold. The napkin read a single word that felt like thunder. Annex. She mapped exits in the mirrored pane and counted 3 bad choices. The inmate said, "Annex means records, not mercy," and smirked like he wanted a favor owed. Maya Cole said, "I do not barter," though her heartbeat pounded for collateral. The guard tapped the glass, and the line died mid-breath. She folded the napkin into her sleeve and tasted metal. In the courthouse basement, Ethan Price said, "Chain of custody should breathe, not vanish," and the clerk shrugged without looking up. The clerk said, "Annex boxes moved last week," and tapped a form with a lazy finger. Ethan Price said, "Moved where?" and the word ricocheted off steel shelves. Rain ticked against a ground window like a metronome of bad news. Chris Alvarez said on speaker, "Leave it for me," and his tone sounded too smooth to grip. Ethan Price said, "Myas, life is in those pages," and felt a line tighten. The clerk said, "Judge seal on the transfer," then coughed into his sleeve. Ethan killed the call and whispered, "We breathe anyway." He slid his phone into his pocket and photographed every barcode. Noah Kim slipped under the tape at the burned warehouse and said, "You left your secrets in the ash to the dark." His flashlight jittered over blistered beams until it found a bent key fob. He said, Ava tapped twice and tapped the metal, listening for a ghost. Sirens muttered far away, patient and hungry. He sketched scorch patterns fast, hands smudged with soot. Noah Kim said, "They will not hear me unless I draw it louder," and pocketed the fob. A stray cat hissed from a hole, and dust drifted like snow. He dialed a number and hung up before the first ring. He whispered, "Maya is not the one," and slipped back into the rain. Judge Veronica Hale sat in a private booth and said, "Order the floor clean by morning," as if dirt were a rumor. The aide said, "Annex transfer completed," and avoided her eyes. Veronica Hale said, "Truth is a hallway I decide to light," and paused long enough to bend silence. A wine glass held her reflection like a hostage. She said, "Ava had reach," and the word tasted like regret hidden in steel. The aide said, "One attorney keeps tugging," and slid a card across the table. Veronica Hale said, "Ethan Price believes endurance wins," and smiled without warmth. She turned the card face down and adjusted the crease of her sleeve. Outside, thunder spoke for her and the booth swallowed the echo. In the evidence locker, a detective said, "Drives logged out but not logged back in," and shut the ledger with a sigh. Ethan Price said, "Then it walked," and felt heat rise under his collar. Chris Alvarez said, "We pivot to testimony," sounding like he had planned the pivot all day. Ethan Price said, "Maya needs the drive," and stared at the empty slot. The detective said, "Transfer slip cites Chambers," and left the rest in the air. Chris Alvarez said, "The court can seal what it pleases," and his eyes went hard. Ethan Price said, "You are too calm," but swallowed the next word. He texted a single line to Maya, "Annex, sealed." The lock clicked behind them and then the room smelled like old coins. The cell hummed like a cold wire as Maya Cole said, "Open it now," and held the sealed letter at last. The paper sighed, and the ink lifted a ghost. Ava Cole wrote, "If I vanish, find Annex 3B," and the words burned. Maya said, "You were braver than me," and felt the room tilt. The note continued, "Chris knows the route," and the name cracked her breath. A guard said, "Lights in 5," and the corridor swallowed footsteps. Maya traced Ava's looping script and said, "You trusted him tasting rust." She pictured Ethan's patience like a lighthouse that would not dim. She folded the letter, hiding it in the Bible's torn spine. The ceiling vent rattled, ticking like a countdown she could not stop. Maya said, "I will walk out with this truth," and steadied her pulse. In the diner's back booth, Ethan Price said, "Tell me everything," while rain stitched neon onto glass. Noah Kim slid a bent key fob across the table. He said, "Annex doors answer this," and watched Ethan's face sharpen. A waitress said, "Refill," and retreated when no one moved. Ethan Price said, "You were at the fire," and the boy nodded once. "Noah," said Ava tapped twice, then smoke, drawing 2 quick marks on a napkin. Ethan whispered, "We go now," and gathered files like armor. He texted, "Hold tight," to Maya, knowing she might not see it. Noah said they will lock it by dawn and pulled up his hood. The rain deepened, drumming like a verdict. Ethan said, "Stay behind me," and stood into the weather. The annex breathed like a sleeping beast as the fob clicked green. Ethan Price said quiet and eased the door. Metal shelving rose in dark rows, each label a threat. Noah Kim said, 3B, and pointed to a caged bay with a red tag. A monitor blinked awake, hungry for a password it did not get. Ethan opened a banker's box and found a drive wrapped in legalese. He said, "Ava, you hid it well," and pocketed the truth. Noah said, "Look," and froze a camera feed on a familiar posture. Chris Alvarez appeared on the screen, delivering a carton to Chambers. Ethan said, he walked it in, and the floor felt thin. The alarm light flickered once, a small red heartbeat no one heard. Judge Veronica Hale stood by her window and said, "You brought a storm," as Ethan entered alone. He placed the still of Chris by the lamp. Ethan Price said, "Your seal moved the drive," and watched her eyes not blink. She said, "Safekeeping is not theft," and let the words perfume the air. He answered, "Maya pays for your safekeeping," and felt anger steady his spine. Veronica Hale said, "Ava begged me to keep her sister clear," and turned the frame face down. The room shrank to the space between their vowels. She whispered, "That warehouse was meant to leak truth, not fire." Ethan said, "Then who lit it?" And the question hung like smoke. She poured silence into a crystal glass and did not drink. In the parking garage, Chris Alvarez said, "You should have left the Annex alone," and the echo made the threat larger. Ethan Price said, "You walked it to Chambers," and held the drive at his side. Chris said, "For the greater good," and the words sounded practiced. Tires hissed above them like snakes in wet lanes. Ethan said, "Ava trusted you and watched something flicker in Chris' eyes." Chris answered, "She asked me to protect Maya by any means," and stepped closer. Noah Kim emerged from shadow and said, "Truth needs air," lifting his phone camera. Chris said, "Turn that off," as a security light hummed away. Ethan slid the drive to Noah and said, "Run." Footsteps exploded, and the garage swallowed them. The courthouse reopened after hours, and the storm clung to its steps like doubt. Ethan Price said, "Emergency hearing on the drive," and shouldered through the metal detector. Veronica Hale said, "Proceed," but the word felt heavy. Maya Cole said, "I will listen," and kept her hands folded to still the shake. Noah Kim said, "I have the copy," and tapped his hoodie pocket. Chris Alvarez said, "Fruit of a poisoned tree," and the line tasted practiced. The clerk wheeled in a small monitor that whined as it warmed. Ethan Price said Ava named Annex 3B and placed the chain log on the rail. Veronica Hale said, "On the record," and her gaze pinned the room. The rain hammered the windows and the gallery held its breath. Ethan Price said this drive came from a sealed box logged to Chambers, and laid the photos in a line. Chris Alvarez said, "Illicit entry voids it," and did not blink. Noah Kim said, "The fob matched the lock," and showed the wear on the teeth. Veronica Hale said, "Chain first, substance later," and the clerk nodded. Ethan Price said the timestamp shows transfer on the night Ava vanished. Maya Cole stared at the minute like it could open. Chris Alvarez said, "She asked me to keep it safe," and his voice thinned. Ethan Price said, "Safe from whom?" and the question hung. Veronica Hale said, "Play it," and the monitor's speaker clicked awake. The room leaned toward the blue light, as if toward a flame. Ava's voice arrived thin and brave. She said, "If I vanish, Annex 3B holds the spine," and the gallery murmured. Maya Cole pressed her lips and did not cry. Ava said, "Chris promised to stall the wolves," and the words staggered. Ethan Price said, "This is Ava Cole, age 19, anchoring the record." The audio caught a distant tap, then another, like a heartbeat. Ava said, "Judge Hale can keep Maya clear if the storm comes." Veronica Hale's hand paused over her notes, as if they had teeth. Chris Alvarez said, "Context is missing," and his tone begged the gap to open. The speaker hissed and the clip ended. The silence felt like a dropped elevator. Ethan Price said, "You walked the drive under seal and called a favor, and set a receipt on the rail." Chris Alvarez said, "I kept her alive," and his voice cracked. Veronica Hale said, "Who lit the warehouse?" and the question burned. Chris Alvarez said, I asked for a leak, not a fire, and looked at the floor. Noah, Kim said, you paid the contractor who lit it, and raised his phone. The ledger on screen showed names like stains that would not lift. Maya Cole said, Ava trusted you, and the words shook like glass. Veronica Hale said Marshall, and the click of footsteps gathered. Chris Alvarez said, for the greater good, as the cuffs flashed. The gallery exhaled, and the storm eased by a breath. Veronica Hale said, the drive is admitted provisionally, and the gavel kissed wood. Ethan Price said, we move to vacate, and the words steadied him. The prosecutor said, we require time, and eyed the storm for help. Maya Cole said, I will speak when ordered, and folded her hands again. Noah, Kim said, there is more on the phone, and tucked it close. Veronica Hale said, custody to independent review, and drew a line none could cross. She added, bail hearing at dawn, and the clerk scribbled fast. Ethan Price met Maya's eyes, and said, hold the rope. The rain softened into a tired hush around the glass. The lights dimmed a fraction, and the night felt newly fragile. Dawn leaked cold blue into the courtroom as the clerk said, case on calendar, and the storm finally slept. Veronica Hale said, bail hearing resumes, and her tone carried iron and ash. Ethan Price said, the drive supports vacatur and immediate release, placing the log like a blade. The prosecutor said, chain is tainted, though his eyes tracked the cuffed defendant. Maya Cole said, I will answer when called, and steadied both hands. Noah, Kim said, the key fob and ledger match, and held his phone low. Veronica Hale said, custody will pass to an independent examiner, and the gallery rustled. Ethan Price said, then set bail, and the words found weight. Veronica Hale said, bail is granted with conditions, and her gavel calmed the air. Maya Cole breathed once, as if surfacing from deep water. The release desk clicked through forms as a deputy said, sign and receive property, and slid a bin forward. Ethan Price said, coat first, draping it over Maya's shoulders like weatherproof faith. Maya Cole said, count the exits, and the habit softened a tremor. Noah Kim said, they will watch your steps, and held out a sketch torn from his book. The drawing showed Ava's smile with pen lifted mid-thought. Maya Cole said, she always tapped twice before brave things, and felt warmth rise. Ethan Price said, you are brave now, and the words landed like a promise. The deputy said, ankle monitor stays until review, and locked the clasp. Maya Cole said, I will not run, and tucked the letter deeper. The door opened to a thin, forgiving morning. In a windowless interview room, Chris Alvarez said, I stalled the wolves like Ava, asked and stared at his cuffed wrists. Ethan Price said, you paid for a leak that became a fire, and kept his voice level. Chris Alvarez said, the contractor went rogue, but doubt flickered. Veronica Hale said, my seal was for safekeeping, not erasure, and folded her hands. The detective said, ledger ties your account to the ignition man tapping the page. Chris Alvarez said, Ava begged me to keep Maya clear, and I chose a crooked road, and his shoulders fell. Ethan Price said, then, sign the statement and name the handler, pushing a form across. Veronica Hale said, I will recuse and testify to chain, and her poise cracked a breath. Chris Alvarez said, I will name him, and lifted the pen. The room's hum sounded like absolution learning to walk. At the warehouse ruins, wind riffled caution tape as Maya Cole said, I brought you home, and laid Ava's letter under a charred beam. Noah Kim said, I found the pattern that night, and traced the scorch with a pencil. Ethan Price said, your voice moved the court today, and watched the ash settle. Maya Cole said, Ava carried my fear so I could keep walking, and closed her eyes. Noah Kim said, she tapped twice before brave things, and tapped the beam gently. Ethan Price said, we will push charges to the edge, and scanned the empty lot. A gull cried like a hinge in the blue. Maya Cole said, I will remember her bright, and smiled without breaking. The wind changed, and the smoke smell finally thinned. By late afternoon, the court reconvened as Veronica Hale said, "The conviction is vacated, pending retrial," and the words unlatched a locked door. Ethan Price said, "We request immediate removal of restraints," and the marshal nodded. The prosecutor said, "The arson indictment will follow the statement," and closed his folder. Chris Alvarez, signed confession, waited under glass like a trapped moth. Maya Cole said, "I will testify to truth only," and lifted her chin. Noah Kim said, "I kept the copies safe," and tapped his pocket twice. Veronica Hale said, "I will recuse on all related matters," and her voice lost polish. Ethan Price said, "Justice can walk now," and the gallery stirred. The rain had gone, but puddles kept its memory in light. Maya Cole said, "Ava, I am still here," and the silence answered gently. The deposition mic blinked red as Chris Alvarez said, "The handler was Ethan Price, and let the name sit like ice." Ethan Price said, "I never ordered a leak," and kept his hands open. The detective said, "Funds moved through a client trust," and tapped the ledger. Veronica Hale said, "My seal was to preserve, not erase," and her voice did not tremble. Maya Cole watched behind glass and said, "Tell the whole of it to no one." Chris Alvarez said, "He told me to stall with Chambers," and stared at the table edge. Ethan Price said, "I told you to secure the drive," and anger rose like heat. "Noah," Kim whispered. "Truth needs air," and checked his phone again. The stenographer's keys rattled like rain on tin. Silence crowded the corners and refused to leave. On the courthouse roof, wind tugged at loose tarps as Maya Cole said, "Did you steer him?" and kept her eyes on the skyline. Ethan Price said, "I asked him to buy time under the seal," and swallowed the next word. Maya Cole said, "Time cost fire," and the air thinned. Ethan Price said, "I thought pressure might flush the truth," and regret roughened his tone. She said, "You taught me to breathe, but at what price?" and the roof fan clicked. Ethan said, "I would choose you again," and the vow felt heavy. Below them, sirens stitched calm into traffic. Maya Cole said, "Ava trusted you," and the name softened to thread. Ethan Price said, "I failed her by inches," and looked away. The wind carried the word handler and dropped it between them like glass. At the Riverwalk, Maya Cole said, "Ava, I brought you back here," and pressed the letter's crease until it revealed a second seam. A sliver of paper slid free like a held breath. Ava Cole had written, "Trust the path, not the guide," in looping ink. Maya Cole said, "You always spoke in puzzles," and smiled without warmth. She touched the rail where Ava once hummed and tapped twice. A jogger passed, and the world kept moving. Maya Cole said, "I will carry what you could not," and folded the note into her cuff. The water pressed dark against pilings and whispered old things. She said, "I will not confuse comfort with safety again," and felt the vow root. A gull tilted, and the current erased her reflection for a moment. On the courthouse steps, Veronica Hale said, "I resigned from related matters," and faced the cameras bare. The prosecutor said, "New indictments will follow," and kept his folder shut. Ethan Price said, "We will try this in light," though his eyes winced. Maya Cole said, "Truth first," and the chant rose behind her. Noah Kim said, "There is a voicemail where he says stall," and the word he hung between names. He held the screen up, thumb hovering like a trigger. Maya Cole said, "Do not become what burned us," and the crowd hushed. Noah Kim lowered the phone and said, "Then we breathe and build, choosing air." The microphones hissed, impatient for blood. The clouds parted but left the light uncertain. Night returned quiet as Maya Cole stood at the memorial wall, where names caught candlelight. She said, "Ava, your tap still moves me," and tapped twice against stone. Ethan Price said behind her, "I will testify to every compromise," and his voice was tired. She said, "Then let the fire end here," and did not turn. The city hummed like a far ocean. Veronica Hale walked past without stopping and said, Make it cleaner than we did to the dark. Noah Kim set a sketch between candles and said, I drew you running toward light. Maya Cole said, justice hurt us, and still, I want it. A breeze bent the flames and did not kill them. Maya Cole said, maybe the hand that saved me also struck the match, and the night kept the answer.